Picture this. You check the news, and every country is in debt. The US owes trillions, Europe trillions, Japan even more. And you pause for a second and think, wait, if everyone owes money, who are they actually paying? Because that doesn't make sense. Debt usually means someone wins and someone loses. So if every country is losing, who is winning? Here's the twist. They're not all borrowing from the same place. And once you understand who they owe, you start to see how the entire financial system actually works. Because this isn't just economics. This is the structure behind money itself. And it's not what most people think. Look, here's the thing. Most people imagine debt like a credit card. You borrow money from someone else and you owe it back. Simple. But when it comes to countries, that model breaks. Because governments don't just borrow money, they issue it. And that changes everything. Let's start with something simple. When a government needs money, it doesn't go to a bank like you do. It issues bonds. Think of a bond like an IOU. The government says, lend me $1,000 today, and I'll pay you back with interest later. Now here's where it gets interesting. Who buys those bonds? That's the key. Because the answer is almost everyone. Other countries buy them, banks buy them, pension funds buy them. Even you indirectly own them through retirement accounts. So when people ask, who does the US owe? The answer is partly itself, and partly everyone else. Let's break that down. A huge portion of government debt is actually owned domestically. That means institutions inside the country hold it. Social security funds, government trust funds, central banks. So in a weird way, the government owes money to its own system. It's like your left pocket owing your right pocket. Strange, right? But it gets deeper, because then there's external debt. This is what people usually focus on. Countries like China or Japan holding US debt. And yeah, that's real, but it's not the full picture. Because even those countries, they're playing the same game. They also have debt. They also issue bonds. They also owe money. So now you've got this global web where everyone is lending to everyone. And this is where it gets confusing, because it starts to feel like a loop. Country A owes country B owes country C owes country A. So again, who actually wins? Here's what most people don't realize. The system isn't designed for debt to be eliminated. It's designed for debt to be managed. That's a completely different goal. Because if all debt disappeared overnight, the system would collapse. Let me show you why. Debt is not just a burden, it's also an asset. When you owe $1,000, someone else owns that $1,000 as an investment. Your debt is their asset. So if you suddenly erase all debt, you also erase someone else's wealth. That's why the system can't just reset. Now let's make this real with numbers. Imagine a government issues $1 trillion in bonds. Investors buy those bonds, expecting, say, 3% interest. That means the government owes $30 billion a year just in interest payments. That sounds like a problem, but here's the twist. That $30 billion, it doesn't disappear. It goes back into the economy, to investors, to institutions, to retirement funds. So the debt is actually feeding the system.
And this is where it gets really interesting, because governments don't operate like households. You're told to avoid debt, pay it off, be free. But governments, they roll debt forward constantly. They borrow new money to pay old debt. And as long as the economy grows, that system can keep going. Now, you might be thinking, that sounds dangerous. And you're right, it can be. But here's the key detail most people miss. It's not about the amount of debt. It's about the ability to service it. Think of it like this. If you owe $10,000 but make $100,000 a year, you're fine. If you owe $10,000 but make only $20,000, now it's a problem. Same debt, different context. Countries work the exact same way. That's why you'll hear terms like debt to GDP ratio. It measures debt relative to economic output. Because what really matters is, can the country generate enough income to manage its obligations? But wait, here's where it gets dangerous. Because there's one player we haven't fully talked about yet: central banks. Central banks are the hidden engine of this system. They can buy government debt. They can create money. They can influence interest rates. And that gives them enormous power. When a central bank buys government bonds, it's essentially injecting money into the system. This is called monetizing the debt. And during crises, it happens a lot. Now think about that. The government issues debt, the central bank buys it with newly created money. So in some cases, the system is lending to itself using money it just created. That's the part that feels almost unreal. And this is what most people don't realize. Money and debt are deeply connected. In fact, in modern systems, most money is created through debt. When banks lend money, they don't just transfer existing cash, they create new money through loans. So debt isn't just a consequence of the system, it's a core part of how money enters circulation. Now step back for a second. If money comes from debt, and debt is everywhere, then the system needs ongoing borrowing to function. That's the loop. That's the engine. But here's the question that should really make you think. What happens if borrowing slows down or stops? The answer is growth slows, spending drops, and the system contracts. That's why during recessions, governments often increase debt to stimulate the economy. So now you start to see the bigger picture. Debt isn't just a problem, it's a tool, a lever, a mechanism to keep things moving. But, and this is important, that doesn't mean it's harmless, because the system depends on confidence. As long as investors believe a country can repay its debt, they keep lending. Interest rates stay manageable. Everything works. But if that confidence breaks, everything changes. Borrowing becomes expensive, currencies weaken, and suddenly debt becomes a crisis. This is what we've seen in various countries over time, not because debt exists, but because trust disappears. Now you might be thinking, so is this system broken? Not exactly, but it is fragile because it relies on balance. Too little debt, the economy slows. Too much debt, risk increases. Too fast, instability. Too slow, stagnation.
So governments walk a tightrope, constantly adjusting, constantly managing, trying to keep the system stable. And here's where it gets personal, because even though this is happening at a global level, it affects your life directly. Interest rates, inflation, job markets, all of these are influenced by how debt is managed. When debt expands, money flows, opportunities increase, but so can inflation. When debt contracts, things tighten, spending drops. So even if you're not thinking about government debt, it's shaping your financial reality every single day. Now let's bring this full circle. If every country is in debt, who do they owe? They owe each other. They owe institutions. They owe investors. And sometimes they even owe money to entities that created that money in the first place. It's not a simple line. It's a network, a web, a system designed to keep moving, not to settle. And this is the final shift. The biggest risk isn't that countries have debt. The biggest risk is not understanding what that debt represents. Because once you see it clearly, you stop thinking of money as just something you earn and spend. You start seeing it as part of a larger system, a system driven by trust, by growth, by constant motion. And that changes how you think, how you plan, how you make decisions. Because in a world built on debt, the people who understand the system are the ones who navigate it best. So the next time you hear that every country is in debt, don't just think of it as a problem. Think of it as a clue, a signal, a window into how the system really works. And once you understand that, you're no longer just participating, you're playing the game with awareness. If you want to understand how money really works, subscribe.